My name is Holly Remillard. I'm 29 years old, and I was in the middle of cutting into my mother's pot roast when my boyfriend decided to destroy my entire family with one sentence. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were non-negotiable. They always had been. Growing up, no matter how chaotic the week got, Sundays were sacred food crowded onto the table, overlapping conversations, someone always laughing too loud. It was the one place in my life that felt steady, predictable, safe. That night was supposed to be no different. My older brother was there with his wife, 7 months pregnant, balancing a plate on one hand while keeping an eye on their 3-year-old son. My sister-in-law was glowing in that exhausted, soft way only pregnant women seem to manage. My parents were relaxed, happy. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and gravy. And then there was Marcus, my boyfriend of 11 months, sitting beside me scrolling on his phone like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales. Long hours, aggressive quotas, constant pressure. He made good money and never let anyone forget it. We'd moved fast friends to dating to living together in under a year. At the time, it felt exciting, efficient, adult. Looking back, it should have felt rushed. He'd been off all day, short answers, tight smiles, checking his phone constantly. I noticed, but I ignored it. I always did. When my sister-in-law started talking with my mom about nursery colors, Marcus let out a sigh so loud the conversation stopped. My mom blinked. "Something wrong, Marcus?" He didn't look up. "No, just wondering if this is all we're going to talk about. Baby stuff." My sister-in-law laughed nervously. "Sorry, I know I'm boring lately." "You're not boring," Marcus said quickly, then tilted his head. "You're just limited. Like your whole personality is being pregnant and staying home. Don't you want to actually do something with your life?" The table went dead silent. My brother froze fork halfway to his mouth. My father's expression hardened. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. "She's raising our children," my brother said carefully. "That is doing something." Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on. Let's be adults here," he said. "Your wife is just a loser stay-at-home mom. That's not a real job. She's not contributing anything to society. She's basically a parasite living off your paycheck while the rest of us actually work." I watched my sister-in-law's face collapse in real time. This woman volunteered at the library twice a week. She drove my grandmother to medical appointments. She organized the fundraiser that paid for new playground equipment at the local park. And she did all of that while growing a human being inside her. "Interesting take," I said flatly. My brother stood up without a word, took his wife's hand, lifted their son from the high chair, and walked out. The door closed softly behind them. Marcus looked around confused. "What, I'm just being honest?" "No," my father said quietly. Nobody needed to say that. "Get your purse," I said. "Get out of my parents' house." Marcus stared at me. "Excuse me. You just called a pregnant woman a parasite. You're done here." "You're seriously taking their side," he snapped. "They're my family," I said. "And you crossed a line." My mother stood, voice shaking. "I stayed home with my boys for 8 years. Am I a loser too?" "That was different," Marcus said dismissively. "That was the 80s. "Get out," my father said. "Now." The drive home was silent, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. The silence followed us all the way back to the apartment, thick and suffocating, broken only by the occasional click of Marcus's turn signal. I stared out the passenger side window, watching familiar streets blur past, trying to slow the pounding in my chest. I kept replaying the look on my sister-in-law's face, how she'd pressed her lips together, how her eyes had filled. But she hadn't let the tears fall until the door closed behind her. That image burned into me in a way no argument ever had. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be rehearsing a defense in his head, jaw-tight fingers gripping the steering wheel like he was the one wronged. As soon as we stepped inside the apartment, he launched into it. He said everyone had overreacted. He said my family was too sensitive. He said someone had needed to say the truth out loud eventually, and if they couldn't handle it, that was on them. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened, and with every sentence, something inside me quietly hardened. When he finally paused, waiting for me to agree, I told him one thing: he was not to contact my family. Not my brother, not my sister-in-law, not my parents. Not to explain, not to justify, not to clear things up. Nothing. He scoffed, rolled his eyes, said I was being dramatic. But I repeated it slower this time until he realized I wasn't negotiating. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. It was my brother. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He asked one question: was Marcus sorry I told him the truth, that Marcus thought everyone was overreacting? There was a long pause on the line. Then my brother exhaled sharply. He said that in that case, Marcus was banned from everything: birthdays, holidays, hospital visits, the baby shower, the baptism, all of it. He said his wife had cried herself to sleep the night before, worrying that maybe on some level she really was worthless. Hearing that snapped something tight and fragile inside my chest. When I hung up, Marcus was standing in the bedroom doorway. He'd heard everything. "He can't ban me," he said flatly. "That's ridiculous." "He can," I replied. "And he just did." He laughed, pacing the living room, running a hand through his hair. He said my sister-in-law needed thicker skin, that if she was going to choose to stay home, she had to accept that people would judge her. I told him the only person judging her was him. He countered that my parents were probably secretly worried, too, that no one liked seeing their son support a grown woman who did nothing. That was the moment I realized how little he understood my family. My parents adored my sister-in-law. They bragged about her to their friends. They trusted her with their grandchildren. The idea that she was a burden had never crossed their minds until Marcus forced it into the room. By Tuesday, the consequences started stacking up. My mother called to tell me she was planning a birthday lunch the following month. 20 people. Marcus wasn't invited. She said it calmly, but there was steel underneath it. When I told Marcus, he snapped that it was insane to exclude him over one comment. I told him it would stop being one comment the moment he apologized sincerely. He said he had nothing to apologize for. The conversation went in circles until he stormed off, slamming the bedroom door hard enough to rattle the walls. On Wednesday, I found out he'd tried to text my sister-in-law anyway. Not an apology, just a vague message about misunderstandings and different perspectives. She didn't respond. My mother blocked his number. My father blocked him too. Marcus was furious, accusing my family of ganging up on him, of trying to humiliate him. I pointed out that humiliation was standing in a room full of people and calling a pregnant woman a parasite. Everything else was a reaction to that. Thursday night, he tried a new tactic. He softened his voice, sat close to me on the couch, told me he felt invisible around my family, that no one ever asked about his job, that everything revolved around babies and pregnancy. I asked him quietly if he'd tried talking about his work at dinner. He didn't answer. He knew the truth. He hadn't wanted attention. He'd wanted control. By the end of the week, the apartment felt smaller, heavier, like the walls were slowly closing in. I could feel something fundamental shifting beneath my feet. This wasn't about a dinner anymore. This was about values, about empathy, about whether I could build a life with someone who measured worth in paychecks and saw compassion as weakness. And as Marcus paced and complained and insisted the world was against him, I realized the scariest part wasn't that he'd said what he said. It was that he still believed it. By Friday, Marcus stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and started acting like a siege. Every boundary I set, he treated like a personal attack. Every consequence in his mind was proof that my family was toxic, controlling, and out to get him. He kept saying that word toxic like it was a shield he could hide behind, a way to reframe cruelty as honesty and accountability as persecution. That morning, I woke up to a notification from my cousin. It was a screenshot. Marcus had posted a long, carefully worded rant on social media about grown adults choosing dependency over ambition and how society glorifies laziness when it's disguised as motherhood. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. Anyone who had been at dinner or who knew my family understood exactly who he was talking about. My stomach dropped. I texted him immediately, telling him to take it down. He replied with a shrug emoji and a single sentence. "It's my page. Free country." By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. My aunt wanted to know if Marcus was attacking my sister-in-law publicly. My cousin asked if he'd lost his mind. My brother didn't say anything, he just blocked Marcus on everything. So did my parents. One by one, family members disappeared from Marcus's follower list. When he noticed, he exploded, pacing the apartment, accusing them of trying to silence him. I told him they were protecting themselves. He said that was cowardice. That afternoon, he drove to my parents' house without telling me. I only found out because my mother called her voice tight. She said Marcus had shown up with a gift basket from some expensive specialty store downtown and rang the doorbell like nothing had happened. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, she said no and closed it in his face. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just shut the door. When Marcus came home, he was shaking with rage, ranting about how unbelievable my mother was, how he'd tried to make amends. I told him buying something wasn't the same as apologizing. He said it was the thought that counted. I said the thought that counted would have been acknowledging he was wrong. That was the first time he accused my family of emotional manipulation. He said they were ganging up on him, trying to force him to grovel. I asked him what he thought accountability looked like. He didn't answer. On Saturday, things took a darker turn. My sister-in-law had a routine doctor's appointment and came home with instructions to reduce stress. Her blood pressure was high. My brother texted me furious and scared. He told me Marcus was officially banned from the hospital when the baby was born. If Marcus showed up, security would remove him. When I relayed that message, Marcus lost it. He started yelling about how he wasn't a criminal, how everyone was treating him like a monster. I told him that actions had consequences. He said he'd only spoken the truth. I said his truth was cruel and unnecessary. That night he went quiet. Too quiet. By Sunday morning, he was back online posting links to opinion pieces and studies about stay-at-home parents, financial dependency, and what he called single-income power imbalances. He sent them to me too, one after another, like homework assignments. Read this. This explains everything. I asked him why this bothered him so much, why my brother's marriage, which wasn't his business, had become an obsession. He didn't answer. He just sent another link. Tuesday evening, I got a call from my brother. His voice was tight with fear. Marcus had driven past their house, twice. My sister-in-law had seen his car and panicked, thinking he might stop. My brother told me that if Marcus drove by again, he'd call the police. When I confronted Marcus, he insisted he'd just been in the neighborhood. I pointed out that their house was 15 minutes in the opposite direction from anywhere he needed to be. He admitted he'd wanted to see it again, as if that made it better. The word stalking hung between us, heavy and undeniable. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, realizing how quickly this had spiraled. A week ago, we'd been planning a weekend getaway. Now I was worried about whether the man I lived with understood basic boundaries. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. It was fixation. And for the first time since we'd met, I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest. Fear. Thursday afternoon, my phone lit up with a family group text. One message, one photo. My sister-in-law, exhausted and pale, but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. 4 weeks early. A baby girl. 5 pounds and change. Healthy, according to the message, but small and fragile enough to make my chest ache just looking at her. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the notification came through. Marcus was across from me, half paying attention, scrolling on his phone. The moment he saw my expression change, he looked up. "Is that the baby?" he asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "She's here. When can we go visit?" The word we landed like a slap. "I'm going tomorrow," I said. "You're not." He stared at me, genuinely stunned. "What do you mean I'm not?" "You're not welcome as the hospital," I replied, keeping my voice as even as I could. My brother made that clear. "That's insane," Marcus said, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's my potential future niece." "She's my niece," I said. "And you called her mother a loser and a parasite 3 weeks ago." He started pacing hands and his hair voice rising. He said this was petty vindictive that I was punishing him. He accused me of isolating him from his support system, of choosing my family over our relationship. I told him my family wasn't his support system. They were mine, and he'd burned that bridge himself. When he demanded I fight for us, I asked him what exactly I was supposed to fight for. The right for him to insult people I loved without consequences? That night, I slept alone. He stayed up late, pacing, slamming cabinets, muttering under his breath. By morning, his things were half-packed, 2 suitcases and a duffel bag lined up by the door. He said he needed space to think about whether he could be with someone who didn't support him. I told him that was fine. He blinked clearly, expecting me to beg him to stay. I didn't. The hospital was quiet when I arrived later that day. My brother looked exhausted, but relieved. My sister-in-law was tired, but there was a softness in her face I hadn't seen in weeks. The stress lines eased, replaced by something calmer. I held my niece for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine, and felt a wave of clarity wash over me. This fragile, beautiful life was what Marcus had dismissed as worthless. The contrast was unbearable. While I was there, my phone buzzed. Marcus. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice tight with anger, accusing me of abandoning him when he needed me most. I deleted it without listening to the end. When I got home that night, the apartment felt strangely peaceful despite the half-empty closet and the echo in the bedroom. Marcus had taken most of his clothes. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was a relief. I sat on the couch phone in my hand and realized I wasn't anxious. I wasn't waiting for the next argument. I wasn't bracing myself. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Marcus came back 5 days later, not with flowers or remorse, but with a notebook and a calculator. We still had 8 months left on the lease, shared utilities, shared responsibilities. He knocked like a stranger, standing stiffly in the doorway when I opened it as if we were coworkers meeting for a scheduled appointment, rather than two people who had shared a bed less than a week ago. "We need to talk logistics," he said. We sat at opposite ends of the table. He went through numbers first: rent splits, internet, who would keep which furniture. His tone was calm, businesslike, almost rehearsed. When he finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me with what he clearly thought was sincerity. "I've been thinking," he said. "I'm willing to apologize if that's what it takes to fix this." I studied his face, searching for something: regret, empathy, understanding. "Are you actually sorry?" I asked. "Or are you just willing to say the words?" He frowned. "What's the difference?" The question hit harder than I expected. I explained it anyway, that one meant he understood why what he said was wrong, and the other meant he just wanted access back to my family. He sighed, clearly irritated. "Fine. I'm sorry I hurt her feelings," he said. "There. Can we move past this now?" I shook my head. "That's not an apology. That's you being annoyed that there were consequences." He leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. He said he still believed my sister-in-law was making bad life choices, but he was willing to apologize anyway to save our relationship. That was when I laughed softly at first, then harder, the sound surprising even me. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What's so funny?" he demanded. "You just said you'd lie about being sorry to manipulate my family into accepting you," I said. "And you don't see why that's a problem." He called it compromise. I told him compromise wasn't lying. There was no middle ground between believing a woman raising her children was a parasite and believing she deserved respect. He tried everything after that: tears, anger, bargaining. He offered couples therapy, a written apology letter, volunteering somewhere to prove he valued unpaid work. But every offer felt transactional, like a checklist designed to get him back into good standing without changing who he was. Finally, he snapped. "So that's it. 11 months gone because I said one thing." "That's not what happened," I said. "You said a cruel thing. Then you doubled down. You attacked my family online. You stalked their house. You tried to convince me their marriage was abusive. That's a pattern." He accused my family of poisoning me against him. I told him they didn't have to. He'd done that himself. When he left that night, it felt final. Not dramatic, not explosive, just done. Stop. Part 6. Aftermath and clarity. Marcus moved out the following week. He took most of the furniture, the couch, the dining table, the bed frame, because he'd paid for it, and I didn't fight him on any of it. I kept the television, the kitchen things, the quiet. The apartment looked strange for a while, too open, like a place in between lives. But every night I slept better than I had in months. The first Sunday after everything ended, I went back to my parents' house alone. No tension, no walking on eggshells, just noise, laughter, overlapping conversations. My brother brought the baby by in the afternoon. My nephew announced proudly that he was going to be the best big brother in the world. My sister-in-law looked lighter somehow, like the weight she'd been carrying had finally eased. At one point, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, eyes shining. "I feel like I caused problems between you two." I stared at her, stunned. "You didn't do anything," I said. "Nothing. He showed me who he was. I'm glad I saw it before we went any further." She nodded, wiping at her eyes, then laughed and blamed hormones. But I knew it wasn't just that. She'd been carrying guilt that was never hers to hold. I hugged her and told her she was doing an incredible job, that her kids were lucky, that my family was lucky to have her. She cried again, this time harder, and so did I. Later, my mom asked if I was okay. Really okay. When I told her yes, she believed me. My dad just nodded once and said, "Good." She wasn't right for this family. There was no anger in his voice, just certainty. A few nights later, Marcus sent one final text from a new number. He said I'd chosen my family over him, that I'd humiliated him, that he'd never forgive me for it. I replied once, "I'm good." Then I blocked the number. The baptism is next month. Small ceremony, just family. I'm the godmother. My nephew asked me the other day if my mean boyfriend was coming. I told him no. He nodded solemnly and said, "Good. He made Mommy cry." And that was that. People will probably say I overreacted, that I should have tried harder, that relationships require compromise. Maybe they're right about some things. But this is what I know for sure: you don't compromise on respect. You don't compromise on basic human decency, and you don't ignore it when someone shows you they believe the people you love are beneath them. Marcus measured worth by paychecks. My family measures it by care, by presence, by showing up. I know which one I want to build my life around. So yes, I'm single. My apartment is half empty. I'm covering the rent on my own for now. But I can go to Sunday dinners without bracing myself for cruelty. My sister-in-law can raise her children without anxiety. My niece can grow up surrounded by people who see her mother's work for what it is: real, meaningful, and valuable. That's worth more than any relationship that asks me to tolerate disrespect in exchange for companionship. And if someone ever puts me in that position,